David rushed into St. Mary's Hospital in London on March 10, 2003. His face flushed with a mix of excitement and frenzy, as if he were chasing the greatest prize of his life. He was a successful businessman, owner of a thriving import-export firm that dealt in luxury goods from across Europe, and his wife Alina had just given birth after what felt like an eternity of anticipation. They had planned everything meticulously, the nursery painted in soft pastels, the tiny dresses imported from Paris, the dreams of a perfect family that would solidify their status among the elite circles of Kensington. "Where's my baby?" bellowed at the reception desk, his voice echoing through the sterile corridors, drawing curious glances from nurses and patients alike. One nurse, a kind-faced woman named Sarah, with years of experience handling overjoyed and overwrought parents, smiled patiently and gestured toward the maternity ward. "Right this way, sir. Congratulations, it's a healthy baby girl." David's heart pounded as he sprinted down the hall, his polished shoes squeaking against the linoleum floor, visions of holding his little princess dancing in his mind. He burst into the room where Alina lay, exhausted but glowing faintly under the fluorescent lights, her dark hair matted with sweat from the labor that had stretched through the night. But as he approached the crib, his world tilted on its axis. The baby lay there, tiny and fragile, but not in the way he had imagined. Her skin was mottled with irregular patches, like shadows cast by a flickering candle, and her face seemed prematurely wrinkled, as if she had already endured a lifetime of worries. Worst of all were her eyes, enormous, watery orbs that stared up at him with an intensity that felt almost accusatory, searching for something he wasn't sure he could give. David's smile faltered, then vanished entirely, replaced by a mask of horror and confusion. What is this?" he stammered, his hands hovering uselessly in the air, refusing to touch the child. The joy that had propelled him into the hospital evaporated like mist in the morning sun, leaving behind a cold dread that seeped into his bones. He backed away a step, his mind racing through all the prenatal scans and doctors' assurances that everything was normal. How could this be? This wasn't the flawless daughter he had bragged about to his colleagues over cigars and brandy. This was something else. Something that would invite whispers and stares at their high society gatherings. Elena's eyelids fluttered open at the sound of his voice, her body still aching from the delivery, but a weak smile curved her lips as she reached out. "Raymond Dower, baby," she murmured, her voice laced with the remnants of painkillers and fatigue. The nurse, sensing the tension, gently lifted the baby and placed her in Elena's arms, hoping the maternal bond would bridge whatever gap was forming. But the moment Elena's gaze fell on her daughter, a gasp tore from her throat, sharp and echoing like shattering glass. No, this can't be," she cried, shoving the infant away as if it were a venomous creature, her hands trembling violently. The baby let out a soft wail, startled by the rejection, but Alina only sobbed harder, her dreams crumbling before her eyes. She had envisioned a child with porcelain skin, delicate features, and eyes like her own hazel and sparkling. Instead, this girl looked like a relic from a forgotten nightmare. Her body thin and frail, her breathing labored as if each inhale was a struggle. Where is my real daughter? The one I carried for 9 months. The one who would wear those little bows and charm everyone at our parties. Elena's voice rose to a hysterical pitch, drawing more nurses into the room, their expressions a mix of sympathy and exasperation. One muttered under her breath, "Not another one of these entitled types," while another, more professional, folded her arms and said firmly, "Ma'am, this is your child. We can arrange a DNA test if you'd like," but the delivery was straightforward, no mix-ups. David stood frozen, his mind a whirlwind of denial and shame. He and Alina had built their life on appearances. the grand townhouse in Chelsea, the vacations. In the French Riviera, the carefully curated image of success. A child like this would shatter that facade, turning them into objects of pity or ridicule. As the hours ticked by, the couple barely spoke, each lost in their turmoil. Alina refused to breastfeed, claiming exhaustion, while David paced the room, avoiding eye contact with the crib. By evening, as the hospital quieted and the city lights twinkled outside the window like distant stars, Alina made her decision. She waited until David had stepped out for a smoke, his nerves frayed. Then wrapped the baby in a simple shawl from her hospital bag, a soft woolen thing her mother had given her years ago. Her hands shook as she cradled the infant, who gazed up at her with those unnerving eyes, as if pleading for understanding. "I'm sorry," Alina whispered, tears streaming down her face, "but you don't fit into our world. You're not what we wanted, not the beauty we dreamed of. People would mock us, call you names, and we'd be the laughingstock of London society." With a bitter chuckle that masked her breaking heart, she added, "What kind of baby comes out looking like this? Like something from a horror story." Slipping out of the ward unnoticed in the dim light of March 11, 2003, she hailed a cab to the Thames, the river that snaked through the heart of the city like a silent witness to countless secrets. The night was cold and moonless, the water black and unforgiving as it lapped against the embankments near Westminster Bridge. Alina stood at the edge, the wind whipping her hair, carrying the distant hum of traffic and the faint chime of Big Ben striking midnight. She leaned over, her grip loosening on the bundle. "Goodbye," she murmured one last time, her voice cracking before releasing the baby into the current. The shawl floated for a moment, buoyed by some unseen force, and Alina turned away, running back toward the lights of the city, her footsteps echoing her guilt. She didn't look back, couldn't bear to see if the river had claimed her child, convincing herself it was mercy that the world was too cruel for such a fragile being. But the baby didn't sink. Wrapped snugly, she drifted gently downstream, the Thames refusing to swallow her whole. A soft cry escaped her lips, weak but persistent, piercing the night silence like a beacon. It echoed off the water, unanswered, as the current carried her toward an unknown fate. The next morning, March 12, 2003, dawned crisp and clear, the sun glinting off the river's surface as birds wheeled overhead. Lydia Thompson, a widow in her mid-30s, had made it a habit to walk along the Thames with her 7-year-old son, Oliver, every weekend. It was their ritual way to escape the cramped flat in Southwark, where they lived on her meager salary. As a school cafeteria worker, Lydia's husband had died 3 years earlier in a construction accident, leaving her to raise Oliver alone, scraping by with odd jobs and the occasional help from neighbors. That day, they strolled hand in hand, Oliver skipping stones into the water, his laughter light and carefree. "Mom, look at that duck," he exclaimed, pointing excitedly. But then his eyes widened, spotting something unusual bobbing near the shore. "Mom, that's a baby." Lydia chuckled at first, thinking it was one of his imaginative games they often played make-believe by the river, inventing stories of pirates and treasures. "Oliver, don't be silly. We're not in a fairy tale." But his insistence made her look closer, and her heart skipped a beat. There, tangled in reeds just a few feet away, was a bundle floating on the surface, emitting faint cries. Panic surged through her as she waded into the shallow edge, the cold water soaking her shoes, and pulled the shawl-wrapped infant to safety. The baby was chilled to the bone, her lips blue-tinged, but alive, her large eyes blinking up at Lydia, with a mixture of fear and relief. "Oh my God," Lydia whispered, hugging the child close to warm her maternal instincts kicking in immediately. Oliver crowded in, his small face pale with shock. "She looks sick. Mom, we have to help her." Lydia nodded, her mind racing. She flagged down a passerby for help, and soon an ambulance arrived, sirens blaring as they rushed the newborn to the nearest hospital. Doctors examined her quickly, noting her age barely a day old and the array of issues. Fragile bones that seemed underdeveloped, a chest cavity that compressed her lungs, and facial features distorted by a rare congenital condition. The story hit the news by evening, splashed across BBC headlines. Miracle baby found floating on Thames Live, against all odds. Reporters swarmed the hospital, interviewing Lydia anonymously as she described the discovery. Her voice trembling. "We were just walking, and there she was. Thank heavens, she's breathing." Back at home that night, Lydia couldn't shake the image of those big eyes, so full of unspoken need. Social services contacted her the next day, explaining that no parents had come forward and the child would enter foster care unless someone stepped up. Lydia, who had always longed for a daughter to complete her family, felt a pull she couldn't ignore. "I'll take her," she said firmly. Signing the papers on March 15, 2003, despite warnings from friends that it would be too much for a single mother already struggling. She named the baby Grace after the divine favor that had spared her life and brought her home to the modest flat where Oliver waited eagerly, already declaring himself her protector. The early days were challenging. Grace's cries were frequent, her feeding difficult due to her weak jaw, and Lydia spent sleepless nights rocking her, whispering soothing words. Doctors at Great Ormond Street Hospital, London's premier children's facility, outlined a grim prognosis on April 5, 2003. Multiple surgeries would be needed, starting with corrective procedures for her chest and bones, costing tens of thousands of pounds. Lydia didn't hesitate. She sold her late husband's gold watch, pawned her wedding ring, and took on extra shifts at a local laundromat, her hands raw from the work. By May 2003, she had scraped together enough for the first consultation, where specialists marveled at Grace's resilience. "She's a fighter," one said, "but it'll be a long road." Oliver, meanwhile, adapted quickly, sharing his toys and reading picture books to his new sister, even if she was too young to understand. He defended her fiercely when neighborhood kids peeked through the window and whispered about the weird baby, once chasing off a group with a stick, yelling, "She's my sister, leave her alone." As months passed, Grace's condition stabilized somewhat with medications and therapy sessions. Beginning in June 2003, Lydia juggled appointments with work, often carrying Grace in a sling while serving lunches at the school, ignoring the judgmental stares from parents who murmured about taking on someone else's burden. But Lydia saw potential in those wide-eyed eyes that seemed to absorb the world with unusual depth, noticing details others missed. By her first birthday on March 10, 2004, Grace had gained weight, her cries turning to coos, and Oliver taught her to clap hands, his pride evident. The first major surgery came on June 15, 2004, a procedure to expand her chest cavity and allow better breathing. Lydia sat in the waiting room for hours, clutching a rosary, praying for strength. Oliver left with a neighbor, drew pictures of a happy family to welcome Grace home. The operation was a success, though recovery was arduous. Grace spent weeks in the hospital, hooked to monitors, her tiny body bandaged. Lydia visited daily, singing lullabies from her childhood, tales of brave heroines who overcame odds. Emerging from that ordeal, Grace's eyes shone brighter, as if the pain had forged a deeper wisdom within her. Lydia knew then that this child wasn't a curse but a gift, one that would test her limits and expand her heart in ways she never imagined. The family bonded tighter, their small flat filled with laughter amid the hardships, setting the foundation for Grace's extraordinary journey. Ahead, through it all, Lydia whispered to herself each night, "I chose you, Grace, and I'll keep choosing you, no matter what." The river that nearly claimed her had instead delivered her to a love that would shape destinies, proving that sometimes the most profound miracles rise from the depths of despair. Lydia Thompson's life in the years following Grace's adoption was a relentless grind, but one she embraced with a fierce determination that surprised even herself. From 2005 to 2010, her days in southern London were a blur of labor and love, each moment stitched together with the singular purpose of giving Grace and Oliver a chance at a future brighter than her own. By day, she worked in the bustling cafeteria of St. Anne's Primary School, dishing out shepherd's pie and lukewarm tea to children whose parents often looked down on her worn apron and tired eyes. By afternoon, she hauled laundry for wealthy families in Notting Hill, her hands chafed from scrubbing linens in steaming water, the scent of detergent clinging to her skin like a second shadow. At night, under the flickering streetlights of a local market on March 15, 2005, she set up a small stall selling homemade jams and knitted scarves, Grace strapped to her chest in a faded carrier, cooing softly as customers haggled over pennies. The extra income barely covered the mounting medical bills for Grace's treatments, but Lydia never complained. She had promised Grace a life, and every aching muscle, every sleepless night, was a testament to that vow. On June 20, 2005, the first of Grace's follow-up surgeries took place at Great Ormond Street Hospital, a delicate procedure to reinforce her fragile leg bones. The cost drained Lydia's savings, forcing her to sell the last of her jewelry, a pair of pearl earrings inherited from her grandmother on July 5, 2005. Neighbors whispered, some with pity, others with scorn. Why's she throwing her life away for a child that's not even hers? That girl's face, those eyes, mark my words, she's cursed. Lydia ignored them, her focus unwavering as she sat by Grace's hospital bed, holding her tiny hand through the beeping monitors, whispering tales of far-off lands where brave girls conquered dragons. Oliver, now 10, by September 2005, became Grace's fiercest protector. At school, where he was known for his quick wit and quicker fists, he faced down bullies who mocked Grace's appearance after she started attending a special needs preschool on April 10, 2006. Her large, luminous eyes, still her most striking feature, drew cruel taunts from children who called her bug eyes or alien girl. On one occasion, on October 3, 2006, Oliver overheard a group of older boys plotting to scare Grace during recess. He cornered them behind the school shed, his small frame trembling with rage, and warned, touch my sister, and you'll regret it. When one boy laughed and shoved him, Oliver swung, landing a punch that sent the kid sprawling. The school suspended him for a week, but Lydia, instead of scolding, hugged him tightly that evening, saying, you're her shield, Oliver, but use your heart, not your fists. From then on, Oliver channeled his protectiveness into teaching Grace to read, sitting with her on their threadbare couch, pointing out letters in tattered library books. By March 10, 2007, Grace's 4th birthday, she could recite entire pages of The Secret Garden, her voice clear and bright despite her ongoing breathing issues. Her intelligence shone through those wide eyes which seemed to absorb every word, every gesture, as if she were cataloging the world for some grand purpose. Grace's medical journey was a marathon of hope and setbacks. On November 15, 2007, another surgery corrected her jaw alignment, allowing her to eat solid foods without choking. A milestone celebrated with a small cake Lydia baked herself, decorated with mismatched candles. But the procedures left Grace weak, and infections were a constant threat. In February 2008, a fever landed her in the hospital for 2 weeks. Lydia, sleeping in a chair by her side, missing shifts and risking her job. The bills piled up, and by April 2008, Lydia sold a small plot of land she'd inherited in Cornwall, her last tie to a dream of retiring by the sea. "It's just dirt," she told Oliver when he asked why she wasn't sad. "Grace is my home now." The community began to notice Lydia's sacrifices, and on June 1, 2008, a local church organized a fundraiser, raising enough to cover one of Grace's therapy sessions. Lydia wept privately that night, overwhelmed by the rare kindness. But she never let Grace or Oliver see her falter. She wanted them to believe in a world where strength could overcome anything, even as her own body ached from exhaustion. By 2010, Grace was 7. Her health stabilizing enough for her to attend mainstream school part-time starting September 5, 2010. Her facial condition, though less severe after surgeries, still drew stares, but her confidence grew under Oliver's guidance. He walked her to class each morning, his backpack slung over one shoulder, her hand in his, glaring at anyone who dared whisper. On October 20, 2010, when a teacher suggested Grace might be better suited for a special school, Oliver stormed into the principal's office, all of 13 years old, and declared, "My sister's smarter than half this class. Give her a chance." The principal, amused but impressed, agreed, and Grace excelled, her grades topping her year by June 2011. Her eyes, once a source of shame for her birth parents, became her signature. She saw patterns others missed, solved math problems with ease, and wrote stories that left her teachers in awe. Lydia, watching Grace read aloud at a school event on March 10, 2012. Her 9th birthday, felt a swell of pride that eclipsed every sacrifice. "Those eyes see the world differently," she told a neighbor, and that's her gift. Meanwhile, across London in their once opulent Chelsea townhouse, David and Elena's lives unraveled in a starkly different way. After abandoning Grace on March 11, 2003, they tried to erase the memory, convincing themselves it was a necessary loss to preserve their perfect image. They threw lavish parties, traveled to Monaco, and filled their home with art to drown out the silence where a child's laughter should have been. But by 2008, the cracks in their facade were undeniable. Elena, desperate for another chance at motherhood, began fertility treatments on January 15, 2008, enduring rounds of injections and hospital visits that left her drained. David, meanwhile, threw himself into work, expanding his company to distract from the growing emptiness. Their attempts failed repeatedly, each negative test a fresh wound. On July 15, 2015, Elena finally conceived, and for a moment, hope flickered. They celebrated quietly, toasting with grape juice in their dining room, dreaming of a child who would redeem their past. But the pregnancy defied logic. Months passed. Then years, and Elena's belly grew unnaturally large, as if the baby refused to emerge. By March 2016, doctors at a private clinic in Harley Street were baffled, running scans that showed a healthy fetus but no signs of labor. "It's not ready," they said, a phrase that became a haunting refrain. Elena's health deteriorated. She suffered migraines, back pain, and strange sensations of movement that felt less like kicks and more like a restless spirit trapped within her. David's frustration turned to anger as their wealth dwindled. By 2018, they sold the townhouse to cover medical expenses, moving to a rented flat in a less glamorous part of Clapham. On April 10, 2018, his company faltered under his distracted leadership. And by June 2019, he was forced to liquidate it, selling off awards and assets that once defined his pride. Neighbors gossiped, and old friends distanced themselves, leaving the couple isolated in their shame. Elena, now gaunt and silent, spent hours staring at her swollen belly, whispering, "This is our punishment, isn't it?" David scoffed but couldn't meet her eyes, his guilt gnawing at him. They sought answers from every corner spiritual. Healers who burned incense and chanted on October 5, 2019, promising to lift a curse. Herbalists who prescribed foul-smelling concoctions in January 2020. Even a psychic who, on March 1, 2020, claimed the baby was waiting for justice. Nothing worked. By 2022, their marriage was a hollow shell, held together only by shared regret. On March 10, 2022, it's the 19th anniversary of Grace's birth. David sat in their dim flat, staring at a faded photo of their old life, wondering if the child they discarded was the key to their suffering. Grace, unaware of her origins, continued to thrive against all odds. By 2015, at 12, she was a top student, her curiosity insatiable. She devoured books on biology, fascinated by the human body's resilience, perhaps because her own had endured so much. On September 1, 2015, she announced to Lydia, "I want to be a doctor to help kids like me." Lydia, wiping tears, hugged her tightly, promising to make it happen. Grace's determination carried her through secondary school, where she won scholarships that eased Lydia's burden. On June 20, 2018, she earned a place at Oxford University's medical program, starting her studies at 16, a prodigy whose story inspired her professors. Oliver, meanwhile, pursued neuroscience, enrolling at University College London on September 10, 2018, driven by a desire to understand the mind's complexities, perhaps to better support his sister's emotional strength. By May 20, 2020, Grace graduated with honors, becoming Dr. Grace at just 17, the youngest pediatric surgeon in the UK. Her first act was to establish the Grace Foundation on January 1, 2021, a charity dedicated to treating children with rare conditions, offering free care to 5 impossible cases each month. Her reputation grew, and by 2022, she was traveling to Paris, Berlin, and Rome, saving lives others deemed hopeless, her wide eyes now a symbol of hope in medical journals. Lydia, now in her late 40s, retired from her grueling jobs on October when Grace and Oliver surprised her with a modest house in Greenwich, bought with their early earnings. The home was simple but warm, filled with photos of their unconventional family, Grace beaming after her first surgery, Oliver graduating in his cap and gown, Lydia laughing with jam-stained hands at the market. On November 5, 2022, they hosted a small gathering where Grace knelt to serve Lydia tea, saying, "You gave up everything for me, ma'am. This is your throne now." Oliver, ever the joker, pulled out a chair and declared, "All hail Madam Lydia, Queen of our hearts." The room erupted in laughter, but Lydia's eyes glistened with gratitude. She no longer scrubbed floors or sold jams in the rain. Instead, she tended a small garden, read novels, and sipped tea on her porch. Her children's success, her greatest treasure. Across town, David and Elena's lives grew bleaker. By March 2025, their flat was a shell of neglect-leaking ceilings, peeling paint, and a single bulb casting long shadows. Elena, now 45, moved slowly, her body strained by the 15-year pregnancy that defied explanation. On April 1, 2025, David snapped during an argument, shouting, "15 years, Elena. Even whales don't carry this long." She stared blankly, her voice a whisper. "It's her, isn't it? The child we threw away, she's cursing us." David shook his head, but the thought lingered, a seed of dread planted long ago. They had tried everything: prayers, potions, even a bizarre ritual in a Welsh forest on July 7, 2023, where a healer demanded they sleep under the stars for a week. Nothing broke the cycle. Their once glittering social circle had vanished, replaced by pitying glances from shopkeepers who knew their story. Yet, in a quiet moment on August 1, 2025, as they sat on their sagging couch, Elena touched her belly and whispered, "Maybe there's one last chance." David, his face etched with defeat, nodded. "One last try," he said, unaware that fate was about to lead them to the daughter they'd abandoned, whose light now shone brighter than their darkest regrets. The air in London was thick with the Promise of spring on April 5, 2030. As David and Elena trudged toward the gleaming gates of the Grace Foundation in Bloomsbury, their clothes dusted with the grime of their journey from Clapham. Elena's belly, swollen after 15 years of an inexplicable pregnancy, weighed her down like an anchor, her steps slow and pained, her face etched with exhaustion and desperation. David, his once confident stride reduced to a weary shuffle, supported, registering surprise, his voice breaking the silence. "Please, we've come so far. We need to see Dr. Grace." The guard, a stern man in a Navy uniform, shook his head. "I'm sorry, sir. The Foundation selects only 5 cases per month, and today's list is full. Come back next month." Elena's knees buckled, and she sank to the ground, her hands clutching her abdomen as if to shield the unborn child from further rejection. David's jaw tightened, his voice hoarse with years of pent-up grief. "We've lost everything. Our home, our business, our dignity, all for this one hope. Please, just let us see her." The guard's expression softened but remained firm. "The rules are strict. Applications are announced weeks in advance. You needed to be here by 8 a.m. Tears mixed with the dust on Elena's face as she looked, up her eyes catching a poster on the gate. The image stopped her heart. A young woman in a white coat, her eyes impossibly large, piercing, and achingly familiar. The text beneath read, Dr. Grace, founder of Grace Foundation. Abandoned at birth on the River Thames, March 11, 2003. Due to severe medical conditions, she survived through countless surgeries and the sacrifice of her foster mother. Today, she saves lives deemed impossible, treating 5 cases monthly. Free of charge, Elena's breath hitched, her trembling hand reaching for the poster. "David, those eyes," said her. "Our daughter." David squinted, his heart pounding as memories of that fateful night flooded back. "It can't be," he whispered, but the truth was undeniable. Staring back at him with those same haunting eyes they'd rejected 27 years ago, a neighbor who had urged them to come. Mrs. Patel from the flat next door pushed forward, her voice urgent. "Please, you don't understand. She's been pregnant for 15 years. Look at her, she's suffering." The guard wavered, but held firm. "I'm sorry, ma'am. Dr. Grace is in surgery now. Try again next month." Elena's sobs grew louder, her body shaking as she knelt in the dust. David turned away, unable to bear her pain or his guilt. Mrs. Patel, undeterred, grabbed his arm. "Her name is Dr. Grace. They call her a miracle worker. She'll take your case if you can just reach her." David laughed bitterly, his voice hollow. "A miracle. That's what we've chased for 15 years, and it's only broken us." But Elena's tear-streaked face turned to him, a flicker of hope in her eyes. "One last try, David, please." He sighed, defeated. "Fine, one last time." They had no phone, no internet, just Mrs. Patel's insistence and a fading spark of faith. They returned the next day, April 6, 2030, and the next, waiting under the relentless spring sun, their hope dwindling with each refusal. On April 10, 2030, they saw a sleek black SUV glide past the gates, and Mrs. Patel shouted, "That's her, Dr. Grace." David's heart sank as the vehicle disappeared, no one informing them of their plea. "Did she see us and ignore us?" Elena whispered, her voice trembling with fear. David shook his head, uncertain. Maybe the message never reached her. Weeks passed, and their vigil continued, rain or shine. Through the chilly mornings of April and into the warm evenings of May, Elena grew weaker. Her breathing labored, her body straining under the weight of a pregnancy that refused to end. On May 15, 2030, she whispered, "I must see her, even if it's my last act." David nodded, his resolve frank but unwilling to let her face this alone. On June 20th, 2030, as dusk settled over a quiet neighborhood in Greenwich, Dr. Grace's SUV pulled up to her private residence, a modern townhouse surrounded by blooming roses. She leaned back in the leather seat, exhausted from a 12-hour surgery saving a child with a rare heart defect. Her driver, a cheerful man named Tom, grinned. "Home sweet home, Doc." Grace smiled faintly, rolling her neck to ease the tension. As the gates slid open, she noticed two figures by the entrance, a man standing, his face weathered, and a woman kneeling, her body heavy with an unnatural pregnancy. The man, David, tapped on the car window, his eyes desperate. Grace signaled for the window to lower halfway, her voice gentle. "Hello, how can I help you?" Before David could speak, Alina clasped her hands, sobbing. "Please forgive us. Were your parents the ones who left you by the river? We thought you were cursed. We didn't know you were a miracle." The words hit Grace like a thunderbolt. Her breath catching as memories she'd buried surged forward, stories from Lydia about the river, the shawl. The night of March 11th, 2003, her hands tightened on the armrest, her face paling. Without a word, she rolled up the window and signaled to drive on, her heart a storm of rage and pain. Inside her home, she stormed through the door, her footsteps heavy. Lydia, now in her 60s, sat knitting on the couch, her silver hair catching the lamplight. She looked up, alarmed. "Grace, what's wrong?" Grace hesitated, her voice unsteady. "They found me, ma'am. The ones who threw me away." Lydia's hand flew to her chest, and Grace called Oliver, who arrived minutes later on June 20th, 2030, his car screeching to a stop. "What happened?" he demanded, worry etched on his face. Grace's voice trembled. "They're outside claiming they're my parents." She instructed the gateman to bring them in. David and Alina entered, their steps shaky, eyes wide with a mix of hope and shame. Grace stood before them, her expression unreadable. "Mom, Oliver, they say they're my real parents," she said, disbelief coloring her tone. Oliver scoffed, his sarcasm sharp. "Well, if she's your daughter, take her and go. What's stopping you?" David's eyes welled up, and he clapped, his hands in a pleading gesture. "We failed you. We don't deserve this. But we're here to make peace. Please." Lydia touched Grace's hand, her voice soft. "I've taught you forgiveness, love. Don't let hate consume you. Forgive for your own sake." Grace closed her eyes, the weight of 27 years pressing down. She faced David and Alina, her voice steady but cold. "I forgive you, truly. But you're not my parents. You've lost that right when you threw me into the Thames like garbage. Lydia is my mother. Oliver is my brother. You're strangers. It's late, please leave." As they stood, tears streaming, Alina staggered, collapsing into David's arms. Grace's instincts kicked in. She rushed over, checking Elena's pulse. "She needs a hospital, now," she commanded, her voice cutting through the chaos. They rushed to St. Thomas Hospital, where Alina was admitted on June 21st, 2030. Her condition, critical but stable. 2 days later, on June 23rd, 2030, David returned alone, waiting outside Grace's gate, his eyes sunken from sleepless nights. "Please, just one moment," he begged as Grace approached. She stood coldly. "Why are you here?" He knelt, voice breaking. "Elena's been pregnant for 15 years. You were our only child. After what we did, nothing worked, no peace, no children. This pregnancy came later, and we've carried it in shame. We came so she could deliver under the care of the child we discarded." Grace's heart wavered, her fists clenching. Asterisk, why must this test me? That evening, she visited Alina in the hospital. Alina turned weakly, tears in her eyes. "You hurt Me beyond words, Grace said softly, but I forgive you again. You'll never be my mother, though. Never. Before Alina could reply, a sharp cry escaped her, a contraction, sudden and fierce. Labor had begun. Grace took charge, guiding nurses with the precision of a seasoned surgeon, holding Elena's hand through the pain, whispering calm instructions. On June 25, 2030, the baby's cries filled the room. Grace froze, her eyes widening. At the sight of the newborn girl, the child was frail, her skin pale, limbs slightly twisted, a dent in her chest eerily like Grace's own condition at birth. It was a mirror of her past, a jolt to her core. But what stunned her more was David and Elena's reaction. Alina, weak but resolute, cradled the baby, singing soft lullabies through her tears. David kissed the infant's forehead, his voice trembling. My child, my world, I'll protect you. No one will abandon you. Grace's chest tightened. These weren't the parents who'd rejected her. They were broken, remorseful, transformed by years of suffering. Alina looked at Grace, whispering, We've learned our lesson, too late for you, but not for her. Grace swallowed hard, her eyes misting. I'll monitor her condition, she said quietly. Not for you, but because she deserves a chance. The baby, named Faith on June 26, 2030, became Grace's mission. She hired a top pediatrician, ensured organic supplements, and checked in post-surgery, her expertise guiding every step. Oliver, ever her shadow, turned the nursery into a haven of soft blues and yellows, with mobiles that played gentle melodies. On July 10, 2030, he installed a bookshelf, stocking it with stories he'd read to Grace as a child. Lydia, rocking. Faith one evening looked at Grace. You're doing for her what I did for you. Grace smiled, tears brimming. I understand you now, ma'am. Thank you. David and Alina, allowed to care for Faith, stayed on the sidelines, respectful of Grace's boundaries. They watched, grateful but heartbroken, never pushing past the wall she'd built. On August 1, 2030, Faith underwent her first surgery. Grace overseeing every detail, her hands steady despite the emotional weight. The procedure succeeded, and Faith's breathing eased, her tiny chest rising steadily. By January 1, 2031, Grace's home in Greenwich was a sanctuary of warmth. Oliver bottle-fed Faith, joking. Dinner for Princess Faith, served. Lydia laughed, her knitting needles clicking as she crafted a blanket for the baby. Grace watched them, her heart full. Faith had become a bridge not to her birth parents, but to the family she'd chosen. David and Alina lived nearby, in a modest flat, their lives quieter but lighter with Faith's presence. They sent Grace updates, always polite, never demanding more than she offered. On February 15, 2031, Grace stood by Faith's crib, her wide eyes reflecting the soft glow of a nightlight. You'll grow up loved, she whispered, no matter what. The lesson was clear. Children weren't burdens to discard, but gifts. To cherish their uniqueness, a strength. Grace's forgiveness freed her, but her boundaries protected her. She'd turned pain into purpose, proving that love, not blood, defined family. And that healing could bloom even from the deepest wounds.